Hello and welcome to GryphonArt, which today is going to be about showing you how to make these ribbon and button style closures for your milk carton gift boxes. Essentially, the strength of this closure comes from a strip of card that is attached to the top of your milk carton on both sides. So the first thing that you're going to want to know is the size of that strip of card that you require for your particular box size. So in order to explain that, I'm just going to transfer over to this milk carton gift box that I've already made to assembly stage. Now I would say that these closures can be fitted to the milk carton either at flat pack stage or after the carton has been assembled, but I prefer to do it at flat pack stage, so that's the approach I'm going to be taking today. So the first thing to bear in mind is that these closures are equal to the total width of the front section of your milk carton gift box. So in this case, and I'm using my A5 triple width carton as an example here, I know that that front section is going to be measuring 6 inches wide, so therefore my strips need to be 6 inches in length. So that's your first measurement. The next measurement that we're concerned with is this first score line that forms that sort of clamping section to the top of your box. Now, because I'm working with my A5 series, I know that's 3/8 of an inch, but that might vary with your own milk carton. So you're just taking the measurement down to that first score line. So to sum that up, I'm going to need my strips to be 6 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch in depth. So that's what we're working with today. We do need 2 strips of card, one which will get attached to the front of our box and one which will get attached to the back of our box. So I'll just put 2 strips out for the time being so that we can focus on our closure in isolation. The first thing that we apply to our closure is the ribbon, and I've just opened this box up so that you can more clearly see that some aspects of that ribbon are purely decorative, and it's those elements of ribbon that we're going to apply in the first instance. So I'm going to deal with the back first, and in order to do that, that just simply comprises of a length of ribbon that goes across the middle of that strip. And I've just taken a length of ribbon that's actually 8 inches long, so for a 6-inch long strip I've allowed a decent amount to turn under the ends. I have already applied double-sided tape to the back of that ribbon because that's my adhesion of choice with ribbon, but obviously if you've got another glue that you're happier with, then you can just use that. So I've got my adhesion in place, so I can just make sure I've got overlap at either ends, place it along the center roughly, it doesn't have to be an exact science, and once that's in place I can apply some pressure to stick that down. I haven't got my bone folder to hand, otherwise I would use that, and just bend the excess over the end where it will be tucked out of sight. And that's basically the back section complete and ready for buttons. The front is actually treated slightly differently, and it will all become clear. So the first consideration I need to be thinking about is the fact that my buttons are going to be positioned roughly about 1/2 inch in from the end of my strip at the front. So I only need a little piece of ribbon, and in this case I've already again put double-sided tape on the back of it, so my adhesion's in place, and I'm going to place on the front of my strip that ribbon slightly further in than 1/2 inch at a point where the button will cover it, and again place it centrally at the end, and this is the front of my card, and just bend any excess to the back and stick that down. And I've got my bone folder now, so I can make sure that's got good adhesion. Let's move that out of the way. So I'm going to just do the same at the other end. So about 1/2 inch. As always, it's not rocket science. It doesn't have to be exact. And that's just the excess on the back. So that's the front and the back of my strips, and I can now think about this next section of ribbon that needs to be applied to the front. Now this final length of ribbon that we're going to apply does take a little bit of thinking about and is dependent on the height and width of your box. So in the first instance, there's two things that you need to bear in mind. The height of your box. So this one is still 6 inches wide, so we're dealing with the same width, and I just want to give you this as a comparison. But the overall height of the box when it's fully open is 10¼ inches, and in that instance, erring on the side of caution, I would take a length of ribbon that's 24 inches in length, and that gives me a reasonable amount of dangly ribbon left after I've wound it round the ribbon around the button a few times. So you need to bear in mind this is not going to dangle all this way down the box, because quite a lot of that will be taken up in the winding process. So for that 10¼ inch box, we're talking about a length of ribbon that's 24 inches in length, and for this box, which has an overall height once it's been assembled and fully opened, is 4 5/8 inch. I'm using a length of ribbon that's 17 inches in length. So if we just take a look here, we know that we've placed our little bits of ribbon for the ends at 1/2 inch interval inwards roughly. So this middle section that we need to cover with ribbon is 5 inches. We don't want to fully extend to the end because we want the appearance of the ribbon dropping behind the button. So we've got 5 inches there to bring into the scenario to start with. And from our 17 inches of ribbon length, that means that our adhesion on there needs to start, if we take 5 inches from our 17 is 12, divide that by 2, so we will be applying our adhesion on this ribbon. We'll leave the first 6 inches free, and then we'll apply 5 inches worth of adhesion to that ribbon thereafter. So in order to make that a little bit more clear for you, I've left the backing of my double-sided tape in place because you can clearly see that area of adhesion. So if I just get my ruler here, you can see that I've got 6 inches of ribbon that's free from adhesion on the left-hand side of that tape, and that's going to be one side of the dangly section. I've then got approximately, and it is probably slightly more than 5 because I want that to overlap a little, but 5 inches of adhesion where that backing tape is, and that's going to leave me with another 6 inches or thereabouts of free ribbon on the other side of that adhesion. So I hope that makes that clear, and I can further illustrate how that's going to work if I put that ribbon section in place. So you can see that that just overlaps where those pieces come around the front of my strip, and that's going to be where that'll stick. Obviously it will go down that way, but it makes no difference. So what I'll do is I'll prepare that double-sided tape because it needs folding back on itself, and I'll come back to you at the point at which I stick it. Right, so that's my double-sided tape ready to go. So that's the point there at which it starts and that point ends. So I'm just going to place that over the front of that strip so that it's central and lining up with the other ribbon, and then I can just apply that pressure so that it sticks down. I can use my bone folder to sort that out as well. So now I think you can see more clearly how that's working, which let's just show you the original. So there we are, we've got a similar scenario to that. So the next thing that we're going to need to consider is our buttoning position, and I'm going to be using a duplicate section of card to help me with this. Now we already know that this is going, I've just made a decision to position these buttons about a ½ inch in. So I'm just using a piece of cork, actually, just a piece of cork and a good sturdy pin with a nice end on it so it doesn't make your fingers sore really. So if I measure out roughly ½ inch in, I know that's going to be approximately there. Now that is actually positioned further in than on this particular example, and that's just because I want to be able to wind my ribbon either way and not have these dangly bits too close to the edge of the box. So that's why I'm bringing them in a little bit. It's, you know, a matter of choice, and I can leave that to you. You just need to try and make sure that wherever you position them, they're evenly balanced on both sides of your box and either end. So this way I found works quite well without a template, although I have also used a template in the past. So when it's 2-hole buttons, I've actually decided to make sure that they're in a horizontal line rather than a vertical line, because I feel that it's keeping the holes central to that strip and weakening it less. But again, the choice is yours. So once I've ascertained the position for that button, I can go in and place a hole using the buttonholes as a guide. Just place a hole using my pin to provide the needle point for that button size, because that will vary according to the button size. Now, having done that on one strip, I can then use a second strip, and it does depend, it will become clear later why I've gone down this route, to reproduce those buttonholes. I can then turn them around the other way and use them again. So I've now got buttonholes at both ends of my card. They're equal distance from the end, and you know, so that means my buttons will be placed fairly evenly. And I can go ahead and do that to each strip, and I've got something now to use as a basis for my main section of ribbon. So where the ribbon's placed, sometimes it's not always obvious where the holes are once you remove the pin, but we'll give it a go. Yes, so we can just about make that out on the back. It's just and what that might mean is that you need to use this strip with your, in fact that's what I'll do. What I'll do is I'll thread up my needle and thread ready, and I can come back to you at that point and show you how you can use those holes as a basis for a starting point. Right, so I've now got my needle and thread, and I've taken quite a long piece of thread, but that's just the way I'm working. So at this point, this is our template with our buttonholes, and obviously we don't want to sew it to our strip, but what I can do is line that up on the back of my strip where I need to place my button, make sure the ends are nicely in line. I can then use the hole as a point at which my needle needs to make its first entrance, and at that point, as the cotton comes to an end, I can remove that strip, leave a tail there. At that point, I can put my button in place, line it up, and then I can clearly see where my needle needs to go. So that's how you can use that second strip to position those buttons, and you can do the same at either end. So I'm going to put my buttons onto this strip, back and front, using the same method, and at that point I'll come back to you and we can move on to the next section. So that's the buttons sewn on to the front of our closure and the back, and I'm hoping that you can see that they are nice and evenly positioned. Now at this stage they are essentially finished, so you could go ahead at this point if you wanted to and just apply those with whatever choice of adhesion you liked to the front and the back of your box respectively at this point. But there is one more thing that might be worth you considering before you rush ahead and do that. Bearing in mind that this type of closure is based on a clamping mechanism, you do really want to make sure that there is a good level of rigidity in that closing section, so in that strip. Now, depending on the thickness of your card, you may or may not decide that the 2 layers of card let's deal with the back section first here, that the 2 layers of card glued together are not going to give you the rigidity that you're looking for. Now actually, just bear in mind looking at this that even these 2 layers will become more rigid once they are laminated properly together. So even if I joined at this point, it wouldn't be quite as flimsy as this, but actually I do want it to be stronger than that, and for that reason before I apply my strip to my box, I am going to make it stronger by layering up the strips of card. So all I'm going to do is take a duplicate strip of card, and this is one that you saw me use earlier for my button positioning, and I'm just going to glue it in a layer to the back of that strip. And I've already just put some glue on one here with some double-sided tape, because I quite like to use that combination. So I'm just going to get rid of the backing tape off that double-sided tape now. Make sure that these strands of cotton, actually I could just put a bit of glue on there to help hold those down at either end, and just line everything up. And once I'm pleased with where they're positioned, I can apply pressure down that center strip where I know I've got my double-sided tape, and that will grab that card. And then I'm just going to use my bone folder to gradually ensure that those 2 strips of card become glued together to form a much stronger lamination. And you'll see this in a minute. Now, it sometimes does take a bit of work around this end where the button is, because you've got the bulk of 2 bits of ribbon that have been folded behind there. So it can sometimes take a bit of encouraging to glue down. And it may be that you're using stronger glue than I am. I'm using PVA, if I didn't mention that already. But you know, you can usually check to see. You can see in that region there it hasn't quite glued together, so just apply a bit more pressure. And I'm hoping that you can begin to see that there is a lot less flexing in that now. In actual fact, for this thickness of card, I go one step further and I apply a third layer. So by the time that ends up on my box, it's really strong. So I'm going to apply those layers so each of the front and the back become a laminated strip comprising of 3 layers each. And then at that point we'll be ready to put that on the box, and I can come back to you so that you can see that process. So that's my ribbon sections, or my closing sections, now layered up. All those 3 strips have been glued together and laminated. And if I can just show you the comparison, so that's a similar length of that card strip, same width, and you can see how flexible and bendy that is. By contrast, you can see that even if I grab these right at the end, there's very little flex left, and I'm very happy and confident as a consequence that this is going to provide a good clamping action when it's attached to my box, and that's what we're going to sort out now. So I can bring back my box, which you saw earlier on in this video, that's ready to go, and I've added my double-sided tape as well for assembly purposes. Now all I need to do is decide which is the front of my box. In this case, this is the last flap to go down, and that I've made the decision that between this one and this one, this is going to be the front of my box. Now once these little strips are sitting nicely on that line, that 3/8 of an inch line, they often sit slightly proud. Don't know whether you can see that there. They're slightly proud of the top edge of that box. So for that reason, I apply my adhesion to the box rather than the strip. So what I'm going to do is to use my PVA glue, put a generous amount on there, wants to hold on to that strip. So get it to the end. And then at that point, I can take this closure. And in the front one, bear in mind that the front is the one where you've got the extra length of ribbon. So I'm just going to place that so that it sits on the ends of my box, and also just about on that score line. And then once that starts to take, I can use the same method as I did before when creating those laminated layers, just to make sure that I can apply pressure underneath the buttons along the length of the strip so that I'm getting a good adhesion. So that's basically the method that you want to employ. I'm going to do that to the front of the back. I'll also, so your back section, you're just going to duplicate that again, and it's just going to sit in that position there so that they'll be opposite each other when the box comes together. So I will go ahead and do that myself and give it time to dry, because I do like to give that PVA glue time to dry off thoroughly before pulling on these ribbons. So I'll do that, I'll put my box together, and then I'll come back to you just to show you how I tie that mechanism. Right, so there we are. I've assembled my box. I've got my closing mechanism ready to go, and I'm happy that that glue's gone off enough for me to demonstrate the method that I use for closing it. Now you may decide on an alternative way. It doesn't really matter as long as the box stays closed, but if I show you the method I use, you can either decide to adopt it or adapt it. So front of the box we start with, because that's where our dangly pieces are. I like to then extend that around the end of the box to help further clamp those strips together. and I take the ribbon underneath the button at the back of my box. I then bring that ribbon over the top of my box and underneath the button that's at the front of the box. I then cross over at that point, and the ribbon can then finally just get wrapped all the way around that back button, and you can see how much that now leaves me in terms of a dangling piece of ribbon, and I have already attached a bead to help weight that down. Now if that's not enough dangly piece for your liking, then you just need to remember at the point that we cut a 17-inch strip of ribbon for the front of our strip, you just need to cut a little bit more than that. I have trimmed this back slightly, but not very much at all. So just to repeat that process for your benefit, from the front of the box the ribbon goes round the end, underneath the button at the back, over the top of the box and underneath the button at the front, at which point it comes round and across at the top and does a full revolution of the button at the back. So that's the method I use. If you simply want to use a figure of 8, you'll end up with slightly more ribbon dangling down anyway. If you do that, that's absolutely fine. So that's basically our ribbon and button closure, and I have kept that separate from the box tutorial deliberately for the sake of those who are very happy making milk carton gift boxes but just wanted to have an alternative closing mechanism. I hope that served that purpose. If you're interested in this particular box, it is part of my A5 series of milk cartons, and it's the A5 triple width version, and I'll put a link to that tutorial for you in the description area for this video. So I do hope that this tutorial has been of interest and benefit to you, and I thank you very much for taking the time to watch it.